So every spring, my wife and I do a hurricane preparation shop. We buy, canned foods. We like things like chunky soup. So we buy a bunch of cans of chunky soup, and we make sure we have sterno and, water and other things you need in case a hurricane hits. Now, I think it's been about 10 years. I think it was 2004, the last time we had a severe hurricane episode here in Florida. And so for, the last 10 years, I've been preparing every year for a hurricane, and we haven't had one. They've passed us by. But I've never regretted preparing for them. I've never wished, when December rolls around and it's the end of hurricane season, which, by the way, they have come after that, but generally they don't. So, end of hurricane season, I don't start thinking, man, I just wish we had not prepared for hurricane season, because there wasn't one. Most of the stuff you get in preparation for a disaster is stuff you can use anyway. Most of the things you do in preparation for a disaster are useful things anyway. They benefit you. Knowing something about first aid. It's a good thing whether there's a hurricane or some other type of disaster or not. Taking cover when there's a tornado warning. I'm sorry, I'm hiccuping. Taking cover when there's a tornado warning, even if the tornado doesn't, come over your house, you're still benefited by taking the precaution. And you're certainly not harmed by it. But, every time there is, for instance, a hurricane, whenever a hurricane hits my state, a day or two before the hurricane lands, everything that might potentially be useful during a hurricane is off store shelves. Because, probably 80-90% of the population does not do what my wife and I do. They don't go out early and make sure they have the things they need in case there's a hurricane. They wait. They're unprepared. Some people don't prepare at all. And then, a couple of days without power, a couple of days without, being able to drive their car down the street, and they're in sore straits, and they're complaining, and they're looking for assistance to have drinkable water when it's completely unnecessary. They could have taken care of that themselves beforehand. They should have done it. But they just didn't. Starting back several years ago, I, was thinking about catastrophes, larger scale catastrophes that could happen. And thinking about the condition of the state in which I live, the region in which I live. And I began to become aware that if something major did happen, it was going to be a hellhole. That pretty much the entire East Coast was going to be a hellhole, and that it was going to be difficult to get out. And I began thinking about preparation. But again, for several years, I just kind of put it off. I behaved more like the people who put off preparing for a hurricane. And then, of course, if something were to happen, what would I do? I would be unprepared. And in some cases, I might have 24, 48 hours, like people typically do when there's a hurricane coming. Or I might not. It was a few years ago when I heard there was if you're a prepper, if you're watching this video, you probably heard of it. The near miss of the Carrington class mass coronal ejection. It went through Earth's orbit, but about 2 weeks away from Earth when it passed. That was 2 or 3 years ago, I think. And finding out about that, finding out how close it was to happening, scared the living crap out of me. And it made me realize that for years I had been thinking about trying to prepare. I had realized that I really should, but I'd also just been putting it off. And that if something had happened, if that had not missed us, like almost everyone else, I would have been screwed. My family would have been screwed. We would have been in very bad shape. And that was kind of what made me realize that I couldn't put it off anymore. That I actually needed to start thinking about and doing, not just thinking about. I had been thinking about, but I needed to actually start, figuring out how I was going to take care of myself, take care of my family, if something really bad happened. If we couldn't stay in our location any longer and we had to get out, how was I going to take care of myself and my family in doing that? How was I going to be prepared for that? And it's like with a preparation for a hurricane. There has never been a time that I have looked back at the end of a hurricane season and wished that I had not been prepared for it. There's never been a time when I wished I hadn't bought a bunch of chunky soup, to eat, and that I wished I hadn't had sterno on hand or batteries or, first aid or whatever. It's just never been the case. There's never been a time, I, for instance, am kind of an outdoorsy guy, so there's never been a time that I've wished I didn't have a snake bite kit with me. I've never needed one. I was in fact bitten by a snake once, but it didn't make it through my boot, and I was fine. That was a long time ago. It was a small snake. I'm not even sure what kind it was. It was in the dark. But I was bitten by a snake, and it didn't harm me. But I carry a snake bite kit with me. I've never wished that I didn't have it. So, I think preparation, even for something that even if it seems remote, even recognizing that, in all likelihood, civilization is still going to be plugging along, one way or another, when I'm no longer plugging along, to recognize that that might not be the case, and to prepare for it, and to give myself and my family a better chance of surviving it, I think is just completely reasonable. And I think it's unfortunate, like I've talked about in at least one of my other videos, and there's been an ongoing conversation about it with some people who have watched my videos. I think it's unfortunate that the secular community doesn't take it more seriously. That the secular community is a group of people who's going to wind up being, if the poo-poo hits the fan, the secular community, by and large, is going to wind up being like the people who, after 2 days of electricity after a hurricane, are looking for the Red Cross for water, when they could have just had a few jugs of water, stuck in a closet somewhere, and they'd be fine. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you will like and subscribe if you haven't already, and look for more videos in the future.